We will close this workshop with a panel of questions and answers, hopefully answers. But we will start first. We have a new person with us, Dr. Sinaia Netanyahu. Dr. Sinaia Netanyahu is the chief scientist of the Israel Ministry of Environmental Protection. In her previous position, she was the director of Sustainable Finance of Business Development Division at Tahal Group. Dr. Netanyahu holds a PhD in Agriculture and Resource Economics from University of Maryland and has lectured at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. Dr. Netanyahu was a consultant for the Ministry of Water Affairs and Forestry of the Government of South Africa and for the International Hydrology Program of UNESCO and the Joint Committee of Tax and Environment of the OECD, among many other accomplishments that she had. So Dr. Netanyahu will discuss the issue of population increase from the point of view of the Ministry of Environmental Protection. She will do it very short. Thank you.
I was given just 10 minutes or so, but I must say that I just, when they asked me to participate in this panel, I remembered a paper that I was involved in the middle of the 90s. It was data that was collected at the end of the apartheid in South Africa in 1993, and it was we looked into the connection between, not between the effect of population growth and the damage and the impact on the environment, but the other way around. What it would be the fertility decision of women once they have less access to natural resources. And we looked at two proxies, water scarcity and wood for heating and cooking. It was very interesting because at that time there was some other works that have been done in other countries, and it's not trivial. I mean, would you have more children, at least in developing countries, because children are considered as more working hands, and also they are securing parents for instead of pensions because of failure in the pension markets. But if you have less resources, would you have more children? So they will go the extra mile to bring more water or to get more wood, or would you have less children because you have more mouths to feed? And it was a very interesting experience. We got very interesting results. I can send you the paper if you want, but it was my first experience dealing with the connection between population growth and women's fertility decision while trying to control on the issues of access to birth control and family planning, etc. But coming back to Israel, I just collected few examples from some of the data that I came across that shows us the impacts in the last 10 years. We look today on 2030 and 2050, but even if we look just in the last 10 years, between 8 and 12 last years, population growth increased by almost 20%. Population density per square increased from 279 population per square kilometer to 321, which is about 20%. GDP per capita also went up 25%. So that means also our lifestyle is increasing, and our expectation from behavioral with respect to consumption is going up. Land use for agriculture went down by 10%. But if we look at the stress on the agriculture, for example, I took some indicators like laying hens, cattle, and poultry, for examples. Laying eggs have grown in the last 10 years by about 40%, cattle by 15%, poultry by 30%. That's because, we need it for our food consumption. On the other hand, we have other things to do, manure, any other pollution related to these activities, not talking about the food consumption that we need to feed these animals. So this is more stress on the environment. Life expectancy at birth is going up. We have more years to live, and if we draw the pyramids, the composition of our population, we can see that towards 2030, our pyramid is also growing from a narrow, at the bottom is quite wide, but also at the top is not going to be narrow anymore, it's going to be wide. That means we have quite a bit of elderly people that may not be contributing actively to the economy. So more people to feed, more people that would consume resources. In terms of cars, vehicles, it has grown by 25% in the last 10 or 12 years. Electricity consumption has grown by 30%. Greenhouse gas emission per capita went down just a bit, but now in the last year or so it went a bit up again because of because we don't have a reliable supply of gas to produce electricity. Climate change, the ministry has commissioned the work on climate change and the impact on water and biodiversity, health, and some other sectors of the economies. And with climate change forecast, we see 1.5 degree of Celsius per decade. Increase in temperature and also decrease in 10% precipitation. By the way, the master plan at the Water Authority that Uri was talking today has considered climate change, and I think that you've taken 50% decrease. 15% decrease in water. So we are everybody's taking seriously the issue of climate change. If we look at solid waste, this is even more shocking. From 2009 to 2011, it has grown by 10%, from 4.8 million tons to 5.2 million tons. So what we're going to do, and I have plenty, and we have plenty of indicators, and we soon will be coming up with a book of indicators about our environment. And I make sure that many of the figures, I'm trying to look at the population, at the per capita ratio, and to see where we are standing. And it's quite gloomy sometimes. With respect to population size, I want to say, look at three aspects: population size and growth, population distribution, and the population composition. With respect to population size and growth, so obviously as population continues to grow, there is more pressure on our resources. Some of our resources, like land, is fixed. We aren't going to have more land unless we're going to have artificial lands in the Mediterranean, I don't know. Some of the resources are renewable resources, but if we use them in a rate that is higher than the renewability rate, then we are going to exploit them, like water resources, forests, fisheries. We have damaged the fisheries in certain ways. There are several reasons to that, obviously, not just over-exploitation, but the fisheries in the Mediterranean region also, for one reason, of over-exploitation, has been degraded. Less than 10 years ago, we fished about 4,000 tons per year. Now we are fishing less than 2,000. What does it mean? What does it say about the future? Non-renewable resources is another aspect. How do we treat our non-renewable resources, such as the fossil fuels, such as the gas and the oil that we are just exploring the Mediterranean? Should we export them? Should we not? How we take care of the future generation? And also, this is the natural resources. I will take 5 more minutes. Oh, not 2. Okay. Okay, with respect to, besides natural resources, we have obviously pollution, as we mentioned, lots of pressure on the environment from various sources of pollution. And here we need, we commonly talk about technological change. Yes, we have technology, we can treat it, we can have that on the power plants, certain technologies on the power plants, and we can reduce certain pollution, but technology, it's not the only name of the game. We need a serious behavioral change. So this is with respect to population size and growth. With respect to population distribution, we see more and more people living in the urban areas and in the coastal area of Israel. So again, more pressure, and that means we need an efficient management for our urban areas. What's happening is we can see that across the country, in some places we ease the stress. We are easing the stress in some areas, but we are increasing it in other areas. That means more infrastructure, use of natural resources, and pollution in other areas. So the distribution of population also linked with the distribution of the pressure on of infrastructure, and it has different impacts on the environment. With respect to population composition, we must admit, different population groups, and different population groups tend to behave differently. Right now, when we're trying to do a revolution in the area of waste management, domestic and separation at source of waste management, we can see that some respond, some don't respond, etc. We can still see in certain areas of the country that people burn waste. That means they also burn plastics and some other things that are very polluting and cause cancer, etc. We also see income gap and population composition. Also, when we talk about some people that are rich and some people that are poor, we can see certain behaviors that are linked with that, with rich population, and we certainly see that with West per capita. And certain when we try to look at different cities in the country, we can see in a more economic, socioeconomic high level in areas with high level of socioeconomic standards, we can see higher consumption, high West. In poor areas, we see also another thing, we see inefficient use of resources. For example, in poor areas where we see affordable housing, they're not necessarily sustainable housing. Those are houses without solar means to heat water, so they pay more for heating. Those are houses with water leakages, with cheap building materials, with low installations. So we have to look at that when we talk about population composition and income gap and natural resources. The last 5 things that I want to mention about our office and what we are trying to see and to achieve, and I think we need to promote it more, is one is really behavioral change, is a lifestyle change, to consume less material and to use more services instead. We also promote innovative technologies and also non-technology based innovations, efficiency in water, in natural resources use, and also we try to look at the upstream. Just mention it in the break to someone. Instead of just looking at how we separate waste and how we recycle waste, we want to go to the upstream and to see that we are producing packages that are very minimal in weight and in more recyclable, that has more recyclable materials, and they're more degradable. So we need to change paradigms in the area of technologies. The third one is natural resource management. I don't think that we, in many areas, we manage our supply, our stocks, and also we need to manage the rate of exploitation. So in the water, we learn to do that, but in many other areas, like in the gas resources, we don't even close to do that. Also, another thing is internalizing external cost of pollutions, making sure that we know how to internalize the cost to environment and the health cost of each activity, and also to take the scarcity rent or the scarcity value of each natural resources and to bring it into account when we price our resources. And the last thing that I already mentioned is the cities. We all live, almost 90% of us live in the city. We must be more efficient in managing cities. I'll stop here.
No, I think you would respond.
The answer is that the theoretical amount of energy per cubic meter is 4 kilowatt hours. The actual one is closer to 3. The total amount of energy that will be consumed by the desalination industry in the country amounts to about 6% of the total energy consumption in the country, and will remain such. The reason is that the other sectors are going to go up, and desalination with the increase in the figure, is going to stay at about 6%. It's going to start at 6, go up to 8, and come back down to 6 until the year 2050 is the forecast.
aren't factors like meat consumption, cross-oceanic flights, ski holidays.
Got the message. Yeah. The answer is you can't separate them at all. It's like trying to say which contributes more to the area of a rectangle, the length or the width. If you look at the numbers over time, it turns out that the impact has been slightly more from population growth than from increased consumption. On the other hand, consumption is the thing we can deal with most rapidly and know how to deal with. And more recent things, people are saying, well, the problem really in China is their enormous increase in meat eating, for example. But if they hadn't grown to 1.3 billion people, the increase in meat eating would be considerably smaller. So that you can't separate them, and there are some places where we need more consumption, and the technical issues are much more difficult in the consumption side. In the population side, we know what to do. We don't do it, but you've got to give women everywhere full rights, full opportunities, access to contraception and backup abortion, and your TFR is going to go down. We don't know exactly how far or whether far enough, but it's going to take a long time. But we know from our histories, for instance, of our mobilization at the time of the Second World War, that consumption patterns can be changed very rapidly, and the rich countries like Israel and the United States should be trying to consume much less to give room for the poor countries to do the necessary consumption, where you have people who don't have decent diets, decent housing, and so on and so forth. So the argument over whether it's population or consumption, as I say, is like arguing whether the area of a rectangle comes more from its length or its width. They just tie together.
Does this apply that if we do have reduced consumption rates, then population would become a less important factor?
The situation we're in today is so bad, but we could talk about that 150 years from now and decide whether or not first of all, again, governments never look at the issue of what is an optimal size for a population. It's a big philosophical issue. Unfortunately, we don't have to tackle that now because every scientist knows that we're vastly overpopulated. So we can start declining and worry in the future about how many people you want to have at what level of consumption and so on. And it's an open choice. As Gretchen Daly says, do you want to shoot for a battery chicken style of life for everybody, where everybody has absolutely minimum everything and you have a maximum number of people? You might be able to support 6 billion people permanently that way. If you want to have his present Israeli style of life, then you're talking about maybe 1.5 billion on the planet. But all the footprint analyses tell you, we're far beyond what's sustainable now. And my view, and I think that of all of my colleagues, is we have to deal as rapidly as possible with population, with overconsumption by the rich, and by, I hate to say it, redistribution. That is, we got to share more. And if we don't do that, we're going to end up with our lifestyle dramatically changed, not by our action, but by nature's action. And you all know baseball. There's an old saying, humanity is the top of the ninth inning, and humanity is hitting nature hard. But you've always got to remember, nature bats last.
I'd like to pass on this question to Professor Dayan. Again, is it population or in Israel, or is it the rate of living of some of the Israeli Jewish population? I mean, is it Bedouins and the Hasidic population that have this mass impact on the environment, or is it the richer populations that live on 2.5 acres, etc., etc.?
I'm not a demographer, and whatever I answer will be intuitive, and probably my intuition is as good as anyone else's in the room, but I will answer as I was asked. It's both, definitely, and both, of course, there's footprint analysis showing that a person in Ra'anana has a much greater per capita footprint than someone in a Bedouin tribe in the northern Negev, but it's both. It's hard to separate. I doubt if there's anyone who can actually help you, except for maybe on resource like water. In terms of biodiversity effects and so on, too complex to answer.
It's very short. Unless I missed something, there's nothing about politics, about the PowerPoint. So this is what do we do?
What we
generally and individually.
Well, You mean if we can affect policy, or how do we get the policymakers to start paying attention to the really critical problems? If I was a policymaker, well, first thing I would do would be to use my bully pulpit, if I had one, to start talking about the situation of women in all countries. And by the way, as I said, I think there is no country where women have anything like equal rights. I would do everything I could to institute more research and more action on how you control consumption. That's a really difficult issue. You know, if I said to you, if you had $10 million a year, you probably don't have $10 million in your pocket. But what would be the most ecologically sound thing to do? To buy a small Van Gogh or to buy a small executive jet? You easily can say, okay, ecologically you buy the small Van Gogh. But if I say you got an Apple computer and one of Bill Gates' machines, which one is the more ecologically sound? The kind of life history analysis you've got to do is extraordinarily complicated, and the economists have not yet looked at this. I'll tell you a quick story. We wrote a bunch of us, ecologists and economists, with Ken Arrow as one of the economists and the first author because of Alphabet. Ken Arrow is a Nobel laureate in economics, and everybody says he's the smartest economist on the planet. And we've been pushing on Ken and others, and they've been beginning to think about the issue of are we consuming too much? And we actually sent an article called Are We Consuming Too Much? To the American Journal of the biggest American economics journal, the Journal of Economic Perspectives. And they did publish it, but we got back that one of the editors had said, you know, we've got to publish this article by Ken Arrow and his communist friends. So we got a lot of work to do on the policy front. But that's what I would start doing. It's going to be interesting to see whether Obama does anything. Oh, the population issue, I would first thing I would do is work on improving the situation of women and using the bully pulpit to say, for example, patriotic Israelis, stop it too. Patriotic Americans, stop it too. If you care about the quality of your children and their lives, you're going to not follow Israel. People say, I want 7 kids. Well, what you want is one thing. What kind of life your kid is going to have to lead is quite a different thing. And so I'd have an Israeli campaign for quality children, an Israeli campaign for patriotic Israelis not having large families. There's good reason in the U.S. to have 1.5 children, because then you have George W. Bush's to have as president and so on. So you got to get the half somewhere.
Avital, if I may intervene here also on the point of population, I think that it is important that we understand, and I think some of the indications we're already going in that direction. This is long since this has become only a managerial problem, or even a scientific problem in the sense of how do we deploy our resources, our knowledge, policy in the best way. I think the longer this conversation goes, and many of us have been in such conversations before, sooner or later we're in the realm of philosophy, in the realm of morality, in the realm of social sciences and the humanities, as much as we are in the realm of counting bodies or counting resources. I think this is the most important thing. Some of the implications of what Professor Ehrlich was saying are really staggering. If we know more or less that the big population explosion, most of the population explosion is behind us. Population will go on growing, but not at the same rate, and may level off in 2 or 3 decades. But that doesn't solve the problem. And the real problem, if you really want to grab the bull by its horn, is going down from 7 or 8 or 9 billion to half of that. Now, that immediately involves issues that are no longer only the realm of planning. They are also in the realm of talking about philosophical issues like the meaning of life, or talking about moral issues like what do you say to a woman, a poor woman, doesn't really matter where, who plans her family to be big, as big as possible, and at least as big as possible in terms of male members, sons, because this is her only life support system for old age. Nobody is there to give her a pension or to look after her when she has no teeth and no money to buy porridge. These are issues of a completely different order of magnitude. We can say to everyone, stop at 2, don't even come to the 2.1, which is a steady state population growth, but this immediately throws up issues of environmental justice, and I say philosophy and morality, and I think this is something that is important for all of us to remember, especially those of us who still think about environmental issues as mainly managerial, technocratic or technological problems.
Minutes or more. So let's see. Let's see the lady next to this No, asking this computer.
You raise your hand.
Let's see what your question is.
I
Maybe we hear your question and see if we can.
Constant per unit output. Per unit output.
So choose one. Yeah. Choose one of the two. Okay.
Time to time we hear a different forecast for how many years or at what year the different ecological issues will become a catastrophe. What is your forecast?
It's very difficult to make because, for example, if you have a discontinuity like a nuclear war starting over a problem between India and Pakistan, that's your whole catastrophe. If you talk about what's going on now, what you want to remember is for 1 billion or so people, the catastrophe is already here. But my own guess is that the projections of 9.5 billion people for 2050 are misplaced. I don't think we'll ever make it there, but I could be wrong. As I say, we're talking Bayesian statistics here, and who knows. But if you look at, for instance, one of the concerns, I thought there was a terrific talk on the water situation. You got to remember, first of all, Israel has a highly educated, we've got the whole apparatus here exists. As I said in my original talk, Israel should be trying to lead the world, but that's a real problem because most countries don't have the social infrastructure to do the kind of things that are being done. Also, there's also a rate problem that may come up. The climate is changing very, very rapidly. You're not going to salinate water for Iowa agriculture. In other words, Israel has an advantage. It's on the seacoast. You don't have, in the numbers that he quoted, he wasn't quoting the cost of pumping water 2,000 kilometers, and that sort of thing. So Israel's doing a terrific job there, in my view, even though, as he points out, there are problems with it. But transferring that to most places where it's needed, even rich countries like the United States that haven't even thought about these issues, makes me more pessimistic than many people. But I hope that I'm too pessimistic. I hope that people will get together and actually deal with these issues. And we've done it in the past. We could do it again. We're a smart species. We ought to do it. But unfortunately, I don't see us doing it at the moment.
Some of the solutions that I was pointing are not relevant to the central part of Africa. There's no question about that. Social, economic, administrative, government, whatever you want. However, if you look at the distribution of population around the world, you will find out that more than 80% live within about 100 to 200 kilometers from a coast. So at least, and that is a reasonable distance. So for some places that have the wherewithal, the expertise, the political structure, the economics, and so on, it may be already or may become so.
The Chinese have a long tradition of trying to handle their water, and they also have a lot of the other things, so they might manage it, although when I was just in China, they're pretty depressed about
That's the only country in the world that transfers water over a distance that exceeds 1,000 kilometers. The United States and Canada have stopped that completely for a variety of reasons. 3 reasons: economic, ecological, and political. Nobody on the Columbia River that flows freely into the ocean is willing to have that water transferred down to California, even though there were plans to do that.
You want to remember also we move water around the world in the form of food, and that is another big issue.
Well, virtual water.
Right. Thank you very much. We conclude this workshop. First, we would like to thank our honorable guest, Professor Prof. Ehrlich, for the wonderful evening that we had together, for the other lecturers, for contributing to this important event, and for you, the wonderful audience. Thank you very much.